Today we're going to take a look at the color ramp and really try and break it down. When I first started using this, I found it very difficult to understand, so I'm going to try and make it as easy to understand as possible for you today using some very nice graphics and visual representations of what's going on behind this. I don't think you can ever learn the basics too much, so really focusing on one node I think is extremely helpful, especially for a program as complicated as Blender. I've done a lot of experiments, and what you're essentially seeing here today is my notes on the color ramp. So let's get started. Let's start by taking a look at the color ramp. I've just got a really simple setup here. It's running out of the generated output of the texture coordinate into separate x, y, z. We're just looking at the x information here running into the color ramp. So let's look at the options here. What's going on? We've got these sliders that go from 0 to 1. We could adjust the black and the white. We could change the color data of any of those sliders. We could add new sliders, move those around. We could take those sliders away. We could flip the color ramp. We could change the distribution of stops. We could change the color mode, and we could change the interpolation. So there's a lot of different options, a little overwhelming. Let's take a look first at the interpolation. I think we can clear that up pretty quickly here. So for interpolation, we've got these 5 different choices. We've got ease, cardinal, linear, B-spline, and constant. And it's a little tough to see what's going on here when you're just moving these sliders back and forth. So I found an easy way to represent it with this setup right here. So I'm going to quickly explain what's going on here and just move this over here. So let's change this. Yeah, ease is good. That's the first one we're going to take a look at. And I'm going to turn on this generated graph here as well, because this shows us just a coordinate system. It's going to be a little bit more helpful. So basically, I've got a whole bunch of greater than nodes, each with a difference of 0.1, just gradually rising there, all plugged into these color ramps. So basically we're getting this value added to this value, added to this value, added to this value, and it allows us to kind of see in a really quick representation just what this interpolation is doing. So ease, if we look at this here, we can see that the color data is kind of slow at the beginning. It takes a while to get from black to the lighter gray colors, and then in the middle it speeds up, and then at the end it slows down again. So it's symmetrical around this midpoint. Starts slow, goes fast, and then ends slow. If we take a look at cardinal, there's something similar happening here. It still starts slow and goes faster in the middle, but it's much less accentuated. It's way more gradual. Then if we look at linear, we can see that it's absolutely even. Each stop ends right on the number there. So each one is exactly the same space. It's much more straightforward one. If we look at B-spline, this one here cuts out the black and the white. So it's kind of the same thing where it starts a little slower, goes faster in the middle, then ends slower, but we cut off the beginning and the end there. So yeah, B-spline is a little bit different. In constant, it's kind of hard to take a look at what's going on here in this mode. It really just means that there's no gradient. So this is actually a lot easier to understand. The constant and linear are probably the most straightforward ones. So right here I've got the 4 different types of interpolation, except for constant, because I think that's kind of a different thing. But we can see just really easily, ease is more exaggerated, cardinal is kind of like ease, less exaggerated, linear is just constant, and then B-spline is kind of like cardinal, but the beginning and end are cut off there. Let's go back to this setup really quickly here. If we look at ease, we can kind of see maybe a little bit clearer what's going on. It's still a little tricky to see, but now we know it's going slower, then faster in the middle, and then slower at the end. Same with cardinal, same kind of thing. You can experiment around with this. You see with ease, it's got more black at the beginning than cardinal does there. Then with linear, this is a straightforward one. And then with B-spline, you can see that there's no black at all in the beginning. And if you bring this up, you can see on the color ramp, for instance, the black is way back here. So right now I've got this over 0.5, which is right in the middle of this object, and the black is still hanging out around 2 or even lower. So then constant, again, should be more straightforward for you. Hopefully you guys get this one right away, as it should be a lot easier to understand. So up next, I'd like to take a look at what happens when I adjust the sliders on the color ramp. On the right we can see a linear interpolation, which is coming from this color ramp way back here, and I've just got this one here that we're going to play around with to show you what's going on. So right now we've got the sliders on the two ends. So this is just black right here. If we bring this up, we can see that everything starts to turn black. And if we bring this white down, we can see that everything starts to turn white. So why is that? You may recall that black is actually a visual representation of the number 0. And this gray is actually a visual representation of the number 0.1. This is 0.2 beside it, 0.3. By the way, these numbers should actually be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 along the top and sides. Yeah, all the way up to 1. It's just easier to look at these whole numbers, and that's why I have it set up this way. But just make a note that these should actually be decimals all the way up to 0.1, or all the way up to 1, pardon me. So anyways, this is 0.1 here. So if we take this black slider and move it up to 0.1, what this is saying is that I want everything that used to be represented by 0.1 all the way down to 0, I want that now to be black. So if we move this up to 0.2, for instance, now it's saying everything from 0 to 0.2 on this image, I want it just to be black. Same thing with this white slider here. We don't actually have pure white on the end, so I actually have to move this down to 0.8 to get that first, I guess, second slot there to turn the same color as that first. So I'm going to move this back up. What happens if we turn this one, or change this one here into a different color? Let's try that out. I'm going to change this to orange, or yeah, there's kind of an orange color there. Now we can see these first 3 slots here are now orange, the color over here. And everything else is just a gradient from orange to white. Let's change this white color here. Why don't we change this to like a blue? And now we can see orange all the way to blue. You know, this is kind of the halfway mark, somewhere around here. So I'm going to pop this color ramp off of here and bring in this prepared one I have down here. So if we take a look at this here, I just tried to make it like a rainbow basically. It goes black, white, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, white, black. And these are at each decimal there, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. So if we put this on, we can see we now have a rainbow representation of what's going on. And again, because I don't have 1 on this graph, we don't see that last black one there. But we can change these around to whatever we want, and it looks you know, interesting there. Let's go back to the first color ramp here, and now let's change the interpolation of this one here. Instead of linear, let's look at ease. So again, we can see it starts slow, goes fast in the middle, then ends slow. Same thing with cardinal. Similar thing with B-spline, except here we see that black is missing and the white at the end is missing as well. So let's try something with our graph here now. This color ramp here, this is that first one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this white slider down to 0.5. We can see this rainbow information is now just on the first half of our object. Let's create another slider and bring it to the end and change it to black. So basically, wherever we have this black to white information, it's going to affect how this is laid out. Basically, this whole graph here appears wherever it goes from black to white. If we were to change this to gray, for instance, it wouldn't show the whole graph on the black side. Same thing with if we change this white value to slightly gray, now it goes down in the middle. It's very interesting. You know, you could put a whole bunch of points here and just really make this pretty cool. I think it's a lot of fun to play around with. Do try and play around with this until you get it, until you have a thorough understanding just of how this is affecting that end product there, that end image. Let's take a look at some other examples. Right now we've got the spherical gradient texture. This is plugged into our object, because if it was plugged into the generated, it wouldn't really work out. It would be in the bottom left half of the object. So I'm going to place in an object there. I'm going to take off this generated graph. It's not really useful anymore. Let's make a little bit more room here and zoom in. So this is the color ramp we've got here. I'm not going to worry too much about the interpolation here, but I'm going to play around with these sliders. So before I move this black slider, I'm going to move it into the middle. Just try and picture what's going to happen with this image on the right. So as you can see, the black moves in. Everything that was gray, you know, 0.1, 0.2, as I move this up, it becomes all black. And if I move this white value, everything that was white or close to white is now just white. So now we're looking at a noise texture on the right, and I've just got a color ramp hooked up to it. we're going to try to adjust it, and I just want you to anticipate, or try to, what's going to happen to this image before I move these sliders. I'm going to start by moving the black slider up to about the middle. Basically all the lower end values, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, are now all turning to black. Same thing that happens if we move the white down. All those higher end values close to 1 are now just represented by 1, which is white. So let's try something a little bit more complicated. I'm going to make it black to white to black to white. So see if you can anticipate what's going to happen, and I'm going to set those up. So this one's going to be white, and this one is going to be black. So I'm going to move this over here, move this white down here. So now we can see these black areas, which are those areas there. That's the center of our shapes. In fact, I'm going to go like this here, make it a bit more obvious. Then we've got white, and then we've got black again, and then we've got white. So a little bit more complicated. Let's try changing one of these colors. I'm going to change this color here, make it a bit easier to see what we're looking at here. Let's change this to red. So now those are the center of our shapes. Those are the lower end of the values in our initial noise texture. And then if we change this one here to blue, now we can see these are all the higher end of our initial noise texture. So it gets a little bit more complicated once you start adding more points, but it's really great to experiment around with just to make sure you understand what's going on. Now let's take a look at a black and white image that I grabbed off of Google. I'm going to go ahead and again adjust this color ramp, and before I do, just try and anticipate what's going to happen to this image. I'm going to move the black values up to about the middle. Yeah, that's even probably a little high. I don't really need to go that high because this seems like it's on the lower end of the contrast scale anyways. But if we bring the white values in again, you can see we end up with a very contrasted image when they start to reach about the same spot there. Let's go ahead and change this bottom value to a different color. Let's change this to orange and this top value to blue. Why don't we go ahead and add in a new point here. We'll just change this to white. Just make sure. There we go. And one more in the middle. Let's change this to black. So now you have a little bit more play here. Let's move this up, move the white up, move the orange down, and the black down a little bit as well. So this image becomes a lot more complicated with the addition of those extra stops there. Again, try not to be so intimidated, but just try and play around with this until you really understand how to customize these images. So next, let's check out this image here. I'm going to start by adjusting the black slider, and again try and anticipate what's going to happen before I move these. So if we move it up, again all those lower values are now all just black. Move this down, a lot more white values appear. Let's add a new value in the middle. Let's change this to green, just like that. So if we were to move these values to the left and to the right, we get pretty much an image that's entirely green. And if we move these in, a lot more black and a lot more white there appear. Let's take a look at a couple other things you can do with this color ramp. One interesting thing I discovered that I don't know how useful it is, but I still think it's cool. This object info node here has this random output, and I've always been kind of confused about how this works, but after playing around with the color ramp, it looks like it just gives you a random number between 0 and 1. So we can use that with this color ramp in kind of an interesting way if we plug that random into our factor. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a couple different points here. It doesn't really matter too much where they are, but I'm just going to choose different colors for each one. Leave that bottom one at black. Let's go ahead and choose this second one as like an orange kind of text or color there rather, and then this one here, let's do green, and then let's do blue for this last one. There we go. So because it's running out of that random there, we can plug in here, we get a random color, and if we duplicate this, we get a random color each time. So it's kind of interesting. We could put as many points as we want here. We basically always get a random interval somewhere in there. If we didn't want these gradient intervals, we could change it to constant, and then we would just get a solid color each time. It would either be one of these 4 colors and not some combination of the 2. Another thing we can do is we can animate this color ramp. There's a couple different ways we could do that. Let's bring our timeline up a little bit here, and the 2 different things that I've animated so far are these sliders and this color right here. So let's try the sliders first. Basically, you're going to animate this position number. So whichever slider you want, just select that one. Make sure it's on the right spot in the timeline here. I've just got it at frame 1. And I'm going to go ahead and hover over this input field and hit I. And then let's go to frame 50 and go ahead and change this to 0.5. And then hover over this field again and hit I. And now we can see I'm going to change this to only 50 frames long for my timeline. Now we can see this is being animated. It's not linear interpolation, so there's a couple different ways we could do that. We could either hit W with both those selected and go to interpolation mode and hit linear, or I think we can hit Shift E as well, and then just hit linear extrapolation as well. Or you could go to the what's it called, the graph editor, and do it that way. I find the easiest way is to select both of these and hit W and go interpolation mode, linear, and now it's a linear animation, just like that. So the other way we could animate this as well is just by changing this color. So let's do that at the same time as this other animation. Let's go back to frame 1 there. Go ahead and click on this color. Let's change it. Let's go to green. And now we hover over this color input field and hit I, and that captures a keyframe there as well. So then if we go to frame 50, let's go ahead and change that color to red, and then hit I, and again captures that input field at that frame. So let's take a look at our animation. It's changing from green to red, and it's going from 0 to 0.5 with that slider. So let's just touch on a few other things I didn't mention. One thing is that you can hold down Control and click on this this gradient here, and it'll insert a new point wherever you're clicking. It's very useful, very fast. And the last thing is if you come down here, or no, pardon me, if you hit this plus, it's going to enter in a point right in the middle if your points are on either side. And if your points aren't on either side, it's going to enter into the left of whichever one you have selected. So if I want to point here, I have to select this one and hit that plus. If I want to point here, I've got the right one selected. It's going to go right in the middle there. Then what we could do, let's say we don't want the placement all haphazard, we want them all even. We could just click this here and go distribute stops evenly. And now they're all equidistant, which is kind of nice. Okay, I think that might be everything I know about the color ramp. Hopefully you're able to follow all that, and you can see how you would change it around. This is a very interesting node to use, and you can never be too good at this one. You can always make it more complicated and really up your game with your nodes if you know this one well. Thanks for watching.